Hello, if you're joining us today, we are in drawing class about to go over the full figure proportions and the skeleton bones, carrying over some of the measurements that we are going to talk about here and how they apply to the skeleton here. What this is going to do, or what this is going to help us with, is drawing that full figure, not just thinking about the outside of that body, but thinking about the framework underneath in those measurements and laying those out before we begin adding those details on the outside of our body. Looking first at the diagram on top, what we've done is we've taped these two into one page in our sketchbook. Some people taped it on a few pages depending on the scale or size of your sketchbook. We also have out at our tables a pack of washable markers. There are some extra fine thinner markers in the center of the room. You can use colored pencils or colorful highlighters or pens. It's up to you. So what we just talked about are a few of these measurements already, but I'm going to go over them briefly one more time. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a color. Let's see, what mood am I in to start today? Ooh, this is a pretty blue. I'll do this. So first thing that we talked about today was that bodies all vary from size to size, proportions ever so slightly, because that's what makes us unique, right? Now, this is a diagram that is used as a tool. Not everyone's body is exactly like this, but many artists refer to something similar as something to begin with and springboard from. First thing with this diagram, you'll notice it is sectioned off. This section, we have one, so this section, we have these red lines here. And now you can do the same thing I'm doing with the marker. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those sections are considered, the person is considered 8 heads tall. So that is the same distance from the chin to approximately the top of the skull. And sometimes artists like to use that as a measurement tool. So this is where we're at, the chin. Now, the shoulders or the clavicle bone we'll talk about in a minute, is that collarbone. That is approximately half of a head down. So you'll see it says 1.5. That means it's 1.5 heads from the top. So it's like 1.5 or just half a head down from the chin if you want to think about it that way. Going back to the chin, if you go one head down, you'll notice the bottom of the sternum. The sternum, we'll talk about what that bone is in a moment, but it's between your rib cage, and that's about right here. So from the top of the head down to the sternum, it is 2 heads. Are you with me? Cool. Now, from the sternum down 1 head further is where your elbows and sometimes the belly button line up. So that is 3 heads from the top, elbows and belly button. Now, around that area, general area, we start shifting into, we have a few vertebrae, and then we have our pelvis bone. Now, at the bottom of our pelvis bone, we have 2 ball and socket joints. These are the hip joints, and these are generally 1 head down from that belly button or from your elbow. If your arms are rested at the sides, for some people, the wrists also line up with the hip joints. And depending on the size of their hands, sometimes the tip of their fingers might be extended down to about right there. If they're stretched, again, varies from person to person. Now, the distance from your ball and socket hip joints to your patella or your kneecap, this is the largest bone in the body. This is the femur. This is 2 heads tall. So you have here to here, this is 2 heads tall. From your knees down to your calcaneus bone, which is the heel bone, this is also approximately 2 heads tall. Okay? Now what you notice is that because these legs, specifically in this diagram, these legs are about 4 heads tall, which is half of the full height of the figure. So that is what we called a few minutes ago the folding point, where you can actually fold forward your body, right? And that is sometimes half your height. There, of course, are people that are mostly legs. There are some people that have a longer torso. But again, as a tool for reference, this is helpful for some people. Now, as we go forward into our diagram below, oh, actually, woohoo, one last thing. Side view. Over here, you'll see that this all carries over to the side view. Something to be observant of this diagram. When you are drawing someone from the side view, notice how the curve of the spine is not straight up and down. At the back of the cranium, it curves a little bit outwards, and then it kind of goes down towards that lower part of the spine and turns a little bit outwards there while it goes towards around your pelvis. So when you're drawing the person, don't just do a straight line for that spine. Sometimes those arms, if they're rested, they might be angled a little bit inwards. Your femur bone kind of goes backwards, and then your other bones kind of come forwards, but you have muscles that keep it all in place. Let's move on to talking about the actual bones, though. Now, this is the fun part. Some of you might already know the names of these from anatomy class, if you have taken that. Some of these might sound funny and be new to you. Now, it's important to know the names of the bones because just like any drawing subject matter, you draw something better when you have more knowledge about it. So if the more research you do about your subject, either it be a flower, a type of flower, the parts of a flower, and knowing the names of those parts, you become more observant and you become more careful with your decisions on how you're going to draw that. So make sure that's nice and focused. There we go. I'm going to choose now a highlighter or like a bright yellow or bright orange, whatever color you guys want. Sure, whatever color you think is going to show up very bright over top of this diagram. And what we're going to do first is notice with this yellow, I'm going to notice the top of the head, the bottom of the feet, and I'm going to take this. Remember, we have our folding line like we just talked about in that diagram above. This folding line is where the ball and socket joints are. So I'm just going to slice this across, and you'll notice, whoa, top of the skeleton, legs of the skeleton, splits in half. But what we're going to do is focus on the names of the body. We already know the names of the skull for the most part. All right, we just talked about that earlier or last week. Now we want to focus on what's below there. Starting out with a very important bone that helps us center our figure, and that is the clavicle bone. So we're going to actually highlight, actually I'm going to adjust this camera so I get even closer. There we go, that's what I want. So we're going to highlight or color in the clavicle bone. That is the collarbone. So it starts at the outside of your shoulder and it comes inwards and it almost connects to what's called your sternum. And as I'm going to also highlight the names. Clavicle bone, sternum. And they do have below some of these names some more common names. Instead of clavicle, people call it the collarbone. Sternum, sometimes people call it the breastbone, and so on. So as you're drawing, this T right here could be really helpful depending on what direction your figure is facing. So if they're twisting to the side, that T will be distorted. So you can think about that as you are placing the direction of the figure. That's a common little trick there. From the shoulder, and we're going to start with, obviously, with the front. From the shoulder, we have, going from our shoulder to our elbow, we have what's called the humerus bone. The humerus bone a good way to remember that, I mentioned last week, is when you hit your funny bone, it's quite humorous. Okay. So that is what that bone is called. Notice how long it is. Now you have those two bones we talked about when we were talking about the hand last week. We have from our elbows to our wrists, we have a radius bone on top and an ulna bone twisting on the bottom. Radius on top, ulna bone on the bottom. That, because they twist, that gives us the ability to do this. Flip our hand, palm side up. Then we have our hands. Going back to the center point of our body, we are going to talk about our rib cage. The rib cage consists of 24 ribs, and that extends from the top towards our clavicle, and they repeat going down to about our belly button area, the bottom floating ribs. So be aware of this size and scale of this rib cage, because that's going to be helpful when we do our quick figure drawings. Going down our spine, we have our vertebrae. And at the bottom, we have framing this butterfly-shaped bone is called our pelvis. Oops, I forgot to highlight those. Pelvis. So I like to call it a butterfly shape just because it helps people draw it when they're doing different exercises. And that frames in some of our organs, and also our spine kind of goes through that. Now also, we have our ball and socket joint of our femur. So it starts here. We have our femur going down. It is the largest bone in our body. That is the name of that. Our kneecaps are called the patella. And just like you have from your elbow to your wrist, from your knee to your ankles, you have two bones. You have the tibia, which is more of your shin. It's a larger bone in the front. And then you have your fibula, which is also in that area. The bony part of your ankle, that little knob that sticks out, is called the talus. And then we have our phalanges, which we know are the toes. And we're going to talk about a few other bones on the back side now. So, looking at, we have our vertebrae going down. But before and remember we have our T in the front, that clavicle and sternum. You can think about that too. Clavicle would be on the other side. But another fun triangular shapes of bones are scapulas, or shoulder blades. These are really helpful to identify when you're drawing the backside of a figure. We have, of course, our rib cage. Going down, we have our pelvis. The top curve of our pelvis is called the ilium. And then we just talked about more of the femur. We talked about the fibula and the tibia. And then the last bone to review is the calcaneus, that heel bone. That's something to be aware of if you're drawing more feet or where that weight is shifted. So, I know I didn't highlight everything, but I hope that helps you as we begin our journey. Going forward, I want to talk to you about the exercise that we are going to, I think we have time to start today. Now, before I go over that exercise, I want to mention a few things. When you are drawing a person, you have to activate both hemispheres of your brain. We talked about drawing with the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, that concept a long time ago. And I want to remind you that drawing with the left hemisphere of your brain is when you are drawing with your knowledge, drawing what you know. And that means the science of anatomy, the mathematical proportions, patterns that you see and know now from our diagrams. On the other hand, if you're using more of that concept of the right hemisphere, This is when you draw what you see. This is when you erase from your brain what exactly you are drawing, and you are focused only on shape, line, space, value, color, all in relation to each other. When we're drawing the figure, you are going to be doing both of those things. For example, for drawing the figure with not any knowledge of our skeleton, you might start out with like the image on the left. The image on the left, you see you have some basic lines, but the joints, you don't think about the bones, you just think about these little circles representing the joints. Now this joint below is a little bit down and slightly to the right. Well, this one is also vertical. And you kind of like want to think about, or actually let me just look at the top left. So as an artist, you can think about spacing of shapes with the right hemisphere. You have your shoulder, or the circle here, going down and to the left, this circle here, down and to the left, this circle here. Connecting those lines makes eventually an arm. So it can be broken down shape by shape, line by line, depending on angles and directions. Versus drawing what you know, you're going to combine that concept of applying the framework with those spacing of shapes and lines. And then you have the framework of the skeleton up top, adding your knowledge of the muscles, shaping it as you go, and then you can go ahead and begin clothing. The exercise that we are going to do next is the skeleton overlay. So I am actually going to stop this video now and then have us get our supplies out, and then I'll begin what we're doing maybe tomorrow, actually. Yeah. We'll do that tomorrow. So anyways, thank you for watching. That is what we're going to do today. And awesome. Good job, guys.